We're live in the Element Well studio. We welcome now Senator Andy Berry, represents Copiah, Jefferson Davis, Lawrence, and Simpson County. Senator, good to see you.
Good to see you. Appreciate you having me on this good Monday.
You got it. So first, for the audience, you're new to the state Senate.
I am.
And prior to that, your occupation?
Sure. So for the last 10 years, I have worked, which I continue to do, work for the Mississippi Cattlemen's Association and the Mississippi Beef Council as executive vice president, and just handle the day-to-day stuff there, and represent the cattle people across the state, and help keep them abreast of the issues, and provide some education, and do the things that they need us to do.
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is there is a provision that was buried in this giant spending bill up in Washington that would require RFID chips to be attached to cattle. And that just sounds like government overreach to me. What sort of concerns might you and the other cattle farmers have about this, and the industry in general?
Well, this is something we've known about for a couple of years, and we've been working towards as an industry. But first, it's not a chip. It is a tag. It's a little button tag, a little bit bigger than a quarter, that would go into their ear, and it has the RFID chip inside that tag that could then be read by an electronic reader, a wand, or some bars as they go down an alley. And so there's kind of a two-pronged issue here with this, Gerard, is that there's a proposed rule, and there's what we believe that USDA wants to eventually get to.
Yeah.
So the proposed rule is that cattle over 18 months of age that are not going direct to slaughter, that would be eligible to be transported across state lines. So anything over 18 months of age that's not going direct to slaughter would have to have this tag into their ear. Well, we're already doing that in Mississippi. And so even prior to that, we were already doing it with a metal tag, which was a much more reliable tag system than this little plastic button that they're putting in their ears now. These things are not reliable. They're not staying in cows' ears. They get pulled out. Whereas before, you had this metal band that was tagged into their ear, and they stayed there basically for a lifetime. They were kind of the old bangs tags that we call them. So at any rate, any data that is on these tags would have to be manually inputted, by someone to sit down and say, this came off the Gerard Gibbs farm, was sold on this date, maybe it weighed this amount, and so that's fine, and it's all done in the name of disease traceability to come back and figure out where the cattle came from. The problem that we have, though, is that we believe USDA is wanting to eventually go to all classes of cattle. So that would be anything from a newborn calf to a decrepit, cow that's on arthritis and collecting Social Security. So the problem that we have in Mississippi, and I'm going to say a large part of the country, is that we have small herds, and cattle are just not handled very often to implement these tags to put them in their ear. And so that's going to put the burden on our sale barns or someone further up the line, and nobody is getting compensated to do this. The government would pay for the tag, but that's about a $2 or $3 cost. But me as a producer, you as a producer, anybody as a cow producer would not get any benefit to do this labor and to implement this tag and then to keep up with the data. And that's a whole separate issue is how this data, as you know, data is very important in whatever you do. So who controls the data, who shares the data, what data is shared up the line? You could see that somebody maybe gets docked on their price if something's not done right along the way. And so there's just a lot of concerns in the data management side of that. Our cattle producers not being compensated to put these tags in. And so we've opposed it. We even had, I brought down the National Cattlemen's Beef Association president last year, Todd Wilkinson from DeSmit, South Dakota. Brought him down here to Mississippi just to see how cattle are sold in Mississippi, and he was astonished. He had never seen how we do things here in Mississippi. I don't know how they do them in South Dakota, but I knew that they were different than South Dakota versus Mississippi. So it's a big issue that we've been dealing with, and luckily, I think that we've got some of that handled on the D.C. side we're still letting that kind of shake out, but it's something that we've opposed, the mandatory all classes ID, and have worked to try to prevent that from happening.
I mean, do you feel like that there's just something else, maybe a little bit more serious in the plan from the federal government here? That this is just kind of the slippery slope, as they say?
There's somebody always had the tagline, never trust nobody, or I'm from the government and here to help. And, that's a doubtful question. So, yes, it is a concern. And that's what I go back to that data is, at the end of the line, the packers would control an awful lot of information on that tag. They would probably have the ability to trace that back and everything that happened to that calf along the way. And therefore, in future sales or even, anything like that, I could foresee a problem with some pricing with cattle going forward from a farm that maybe they liked or didn't like, and then again, there's no compensation for that data. Yeah.
So what do they intend to do with it, though?
That's the ultimate purpose is for disease traceability. So if an outbreak of disease pops up, they could theoretically trace that back. Well, they can do that now. A couple of years ago, my next door neighbor bought some roping steers that had originally originated down in Mexico.
Right.
Well, one of them tested positive for TB. When that animal went through the supply chain, they found that and got it tested. Well, in 2 days they had it traced back to my neighbor's farm, quarantined that farm. They tested all the cattle through there. It was about a 6-month process if they were quarantined, and then they released it. All that was done without an RFID tag, and so that could still be done today.
Well, I don't know if this really benefits society, if it benefits consumers, if it provides any benefits whatsoever is the question.
The benefit is that, and I think this is ultimately probably geared around a disease called foot and mouth disease that has the potential at some point in the future maybe to show itself here in the United States. Hadn't had it in years and years and years and years.
Yeah.
And so if that happens, having this would in theory open up our export markets quicker. But again, from my viewpoint, I don't see anything that prevents them from doing that in the system that we have now. It's just another kind of government overreach, in my viewpoint, to collect data in the name of disease traceability when potentially could be used for a lot of other different things. From a marketing aspect. And it just would, from our producer standpoint, it just slows down the speed of commerce when we buy and sell these calves, having to ensure that they have an ear tag in them or some other type of identification. The numbers that we do, we've got some producers here in Mississippi that are handling tens of thousands of animals a year.
Yeah.
And so them having to stop and make sure every animal has this tag, either before it was bought or been able to trace it back to who they bought it from, it would be very burdensome on them.
Well, that just sounds like something that would increase costs, and ultimately that would make the cost of beef more expensive.
Well, and that's the thing. It would increase costs on the cattle producers here in Mississippi and across the country without getting compensated for it. So there's no premium for that, and that's what we would like to see. If you want to pay somebody for this, pay them a premium to have that tag in there,
sure,
and get the compensation. Let it be a free market system. If it's a good idea, let the market drive it, and that's kind of the policy of the Mississippi Cattlemen's Association. Let it operate at speed of commerce and be a market driven system, so that you're compensated for providing that data.
Well, that didn't seem to be part of the program. It was just
it's and the USDA. I think they were trying to kind of slip that in on us a little bit there.
Yeah.
And I've been to D.C. I know Mr. McCormick with Farm Bureau has been to D.C. talking to this. We've been had some good reception up there from our folks to help us out on this, and we appreciate all that our folks in D.C. have done to help us out on this.
Yeah. So were you surprised when folks from outside the state, upon observation of the way things work here with respect to the cattle selling process, that they were impressed, I guess, and seen something they hadn't seen before?
Well, I think they were. They were impressed. The scale that we kind of operate versus what they do in say the Dakotas, where they're handling an 18-wheeler load at a time. We're handling a 14 or 16-foot bumper pull cattle trailer, that's half loaded. And so managing all the different sellers at our livestock markets is kind of an issue that they had never seen before, and we're really impressed in how we're able to get those cattle through there and get them sold here in Mississippi.
Well, that's good to hear that we're ahead of the game.
Yes, sir, we are.
All right. If you can stick around,
Sure.
We'll dig into some of the other stuff going on down there at the legislature. We got Senator Andy Berry in the Element Well studio. We're coming right back. Studio, we're visiting with Senator Andy Berry, represents Copiah, Jefferson Davis, Lawrence, and Simpson counties. You touch a bunch of counties there.
We do. It's a pretty big area. It's over an hour from the northeast to the southwest, or vice versa, from one to the other. It's a lot of pine trees, a lot of pastures, and some good folks down there.
And your farm is in Copiah County.
My
right?
farm's in Jefferson Davis County. So
okay.
I grew up in the little town of New Hebron, which is in the extreme northeast corner of Lawrence County. One city limit is actually the Jeff Davis County line, and then Simpson's just a mile up the road. But I live down in Simpson County. My farm's in Jefferson Davis County. My father had a business there in Lawrence, and then we moved it to Prentiss in Jeff Davis County back in the 90s, and so cover fairly well most of those counties most of my life.
Okay. So one of the more controversial topics, I think it's one way to put it, that the legislature has been dealing with this session is this idea of expanding Medicaid in the state of Mississippi. That an expansion, of course, means adding the coverage group of non-disabled adults between the ages of 19 and 64. The House had a version that they passed. They sent it down to the Senate. The Senate, rather than, I guess, drafting and filing their own version, decided just to strike all. Mm-hmm. I think Senator Blackwell,
Chairman Blackwell
chairs the Medicaid committee, acted in that way and essentially just struck all the House's language and inserted a Senate version, if you will. And then that passed committee, went to the floor, and the vote was held. Was it Thursday?
Thursday afternoon.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you were among 16, I think?
16 of us
in the Senate that voted no for the Senate version. What was your thoughts about that?
Well, it was not an easy decision at all. I appreciate Chairman Blackwell and the work he did. This was, in my mind, a pretty conservative expansion type bill, and I don't really know if expansion is the right word for that, but providing health care for our working Mississippians. Mm-hmm. I thought he did a great job of trying to include those guys. Medicaid is something that I told a lot of people going in that Medicaid and education is probably two of my weakest knowledge areas, and so I spent a lot of time trying to read up on that and come to conclusion and talking to different people, and ultimately, I just heard from my constituents that was just not something they wanted me to vote for. And I'll say it was a tough decision because I thought it made pretty good sense of what we were trying to do to cover the working people up to the 100% federal poverty level there. So, it was an easy decision. But ultimately, I did vote no. I listened to what my constituents were telling me, and I had a lot of different conversations with people across my district about that. And I'm no ill will towards what was passed, but it's just not something that my folks wanted me to support.
Okay. Did any of them, do you feel like they understand what this would do exactly? Do they understand all these details of Medicaid and Medicaid? It's complicated, as you know.
I didn't understand it all. I'm not going to claim in any shape, form, or fashion that I understood it all either when I was having these discussions. But what I was able to convey from the information I had, they just weren't in favor of that. And I think some of the exclusions is what got them. I think the idea of covering working people was good. And some of those exclusions weren't terrible, but they just weren't something that grabbed most of my people as something they wanted me to support.
I see. Do you have any thoughts about where this goes now? You've got two competing versions, I guess. Well, we only have one now. We'll go to conference. And we'll see, I guess, how the House may react. You would look for their reaction because the Senate already has approved the way it is, the way it's been filed and amended at this point. So that I guess the House in conference might want to make some amendments to that.
I would suspect so. I never want to guess what the other chamber is going to do. I know I think Chairman McGee had worked very hard on that on her end as well. And so, when they get together, you know how that conference deal goes. You never know what's going to come out from there. So, just kind of sit back and wait and see what comes back to us. I don't know if I'll change my vote on it per se. I'll just have to, like anything else, I'll wait and see the final version before I vote on something. And so kind of anxious to wait and see what they come up with. And I know they're probably already working on that. And, again, Chairman Blackwell, I thought, had a more conservative approach than maybe what the House had. And so it's just sit back and wait and see what happens.
Yeah. I'm still trying to reconcile the idea that increasing welfare in any way is conservative. I can't quite wrap my head around that one.
Well, I think that's why the working aspect of this was attractive to a lot of Republicans and something that it gave me pause to look at.
Right.
The people that are working need a little help from time to time, particularly those that aren't working a full-time job. But again, at the end of the day, it's just not something that my people wanted me to support.
I see. I still say that's welfare, but that's okay. The other big thing that I've been talking about quite a bit, don't know how much you've dug into that, is the Public Employees Retirement System, PERS.
I've heard little rumors of that, yeah.
Well, honestly, I don't know that it ever got discussed down at the Capitol until this year. And I'm not sure if it's because that there have been a number of folks out there in the media world, and including myself, that have called attention to what is setting up to be a much bigger problem as time goes on, that stimulated the conversation. But there's been a lot of conversation.
There has.
And that resulted in a measure being filed by Representative Zuber over there in the House that passed the House, got sent to the Senate. No action has been taken on it at this point except a hearing that Senator Johnson conducted with his committee and had some folks come in and testified. I was actually present.
I was in another meeting, and I've watched part of it. I hadn't got to finish watching it all, but I've watched part of it. 2.5
hours.
Yes, sir.
Those are long.
They are.
Number of folks, I think 3 people from the board testified, and then also the mayor of Hattiesburg, Toby Barker, testified as well. No action at this point. Have you thought about this one? Is this something you've dug into?
This is something I've heard about. One of the few issues that was I ran unopposed, and so I didn't have to do a lot of candidate forums or debates or stump speeching. But going around, this is a topic that I heard about, and I heard about it from several different aspects. I heard about it from the PERS retirees, the PERS investors, the people who are working now that don't want to lose their benefits, and I 100%. My mother is invested in PERS. My brother is working in PERS right now, earning that. As a member of the legislature, I am too. And so I believe that if you were promised whatever tier you were promised, that's the tier that you should get. And I will not vote to change anything to do with that. Whatever I vote, if I vote for something on PERS, it would have to include that your benefits will not be changed.
Okay.
Well, I also heard from mayors and government officials about going from 17.5% to 27.5%.
Yeah, on the employer
contribution rate.
Yep.
So I also know that in a lot of our small towns or a lot of small communities, that is not a sustainable option for them to keep employees, to keep services. So they tell me they'd either have to cut services or they're going to have to raise taxes. And I'm certainly not one that wants to support raising taxes to pay for the retirement system.
Yep.
So I don't know what the answer is, and that's not trying to have a cop-out answer on you there, but I don't know what the answer is, and I'm anxious to see what our smart folks down there come up with. I tell people all the time I'm 49 to 52, and they hadn't asked for my opinion on a lot of these things of how to solve an issue, but and I don't know that I'd have that answer either. So I do understand with that much of a public input into the system that maybe having some other folks looking at that system from a management standpoint may not be the worst idea ever. Now, I'm not going to say a complete takeover, but certainly have some more people representing the public side of that on that board to make sure, have the best and brightest people out there looking at this system. And if that's PERS retirees, if that's somebody from the private sector, that doesn't matter to me. I just want what's best for the system. And how we get there and what that ratio ultimately looks like, I don't have the answer. But I think that anybody in the PERS system would want the best people looking at this system, and,
Sure.
and that's no shade at the current PERS people there. I know I'm not the smartest person on any subject, and so I always will take some advice from somebody else that I feel like is smarter than me.
Sure. There's a common perception, I might call it a misconception, that the supplemental legislative retirement plan is the cause of PERS's financial challenges. Just briefly, would you support the possibility of phasing out the supplemental legislative retirement plan? I know you're only a year into
Gerard,
it.
I think it was mentioned to me. I don't know what my retirement is. I did not get into this for a slurp retirement, so that for me personally doesn't bother me. I know it's a sticking point for a lot of people, but I haven't even looked out to see how. I think I got to have 8 years maybe before I get eligible. But
that's right.
Past that, I don't know what it is.
By the way, it'd be worth $235 a month if you made it to 8 years.
All right.
Well, I think that's where most people are, honestly. The legislature's not that big a deal. We appreciate you coming in, though,
Thank
Senator.
you for having me.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
You got it. We're coming right back, folks. Half an hour left in the Element Wealth studio.